It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
So I can't wait because here we are. We're in we're about to talk about the 40s. Mm-hmm. This is a decade where, I mean, anybody who's thinking about retiring in their 40s, first of all, I feel like this is the first decade. We've covered the 20s. No way, no how. 30s, we told you it's not a retirement, it's sabbatical. That's typically right. Where you're figuring out what your next career is. 40s is the first decade that I think people actually do retire early. We even have a lot of experience with this. But what does the data say, Bo? Throw me some cold, hard facts. I love data.
Here's the fact of the matter. We all want to like dream and have this thought of this early retirement and doing what we want. The reality is, according to the U.S. Census Bureau in the current population study, only 1% of Americans retire before age 50.
Yeah.
Only 1% of the population actually exits the workforce, moves into retirement in their 40s or younger. So it is very, very elite company that, again, there has to be something unique about you to kind of fall into that camp.
So, but I think it's possible. This is the decade that it's possible. But I do want to, I always like to give experience shares with you guys. And you've heard this story from me before because this is one of the reasons I wanted to own my own company. I wanted to understand how finances work. I experienced my father in his mid-40s actually lose his job. Mm-hmm. Not because he chose to leave, but because the company just got out of his profession altogether. And I saw the struggles it was for a person in their mid-40s to try to find gainful employment, especially from a good job that had perks like a company car and other things. It just didn't exist for him because why would they hire him at 45 starting over when they can just go pick somebody up in their 20s? Yep. It's just unfortunately a struggle. So that's why I always want to caution people. It is possible in your 40s, but man, you better make sure that you know what you're getting into because it might be a one-way door you're crossing. Mm-hmm. Once you go through that threshold, it's not going to be as easy to get back into that high-paying career field that you left, especially if it's a fast-moving career field.
And again, we know the statistics. When we look at the data, if you look at the median income and then the top 75% of earners and the bottom 25% of earners, if you remember the FIRE movement, we're going to make the assumption you probably fall into that top 75% category. Well, you can see that if you leave in your 40s, you still haven't even really likely hit your peak earning years or you're coming right up on them. And remember, one of the great things about having a large income and making a lot of money is the ability to save more money. Some of the work that you do in your last years before retirement in that period in your 40s and 50s, those, for a lot of folks, are when they're able to save the biggest dollars. They're not the most powerful dollars because of, those dollars in your 20s are the most powerful, but oftentimes we're able to save the most money in those decades.
Yeah, definitely your income, your shovel is the biggest in your late 40s, early 50s. And I think it's interesting. We didn't put the graph up here, but we could have done the overlay that we've used before on other shows where, Bo, you talked about the messy middle. Mm-hmm. The messy middle is so bad because you have your first house purchase ever. Yep. You typically have young school-age children. So there's a lot of things pulling on your family budget expense-wise.
Sure.
It all frees up. It's kind of like it all gets freed up in your 40s and 50s because the kids get out of the house. Mm-hmm. Your house is paid for. The debt's reached a level that you don't have debt anymore. Right. And now you're in your peak earning years. God, this is when the party's heated up. I mean, you're starting to hear the You don't want to leave that party early because it's heated up. Everybody's shown up. It's the good time to be there. I just tell people, I endorse and support you being able to leave early. Just measure twice, cut once because this is a golden opportunity for you if you're building wealth in these years. You just need to make sure you understand what you're walking away from.
Now, I love, Brian, that you said one of the things about the 40s, this is the first decade where it really happens, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things about it really happening is there are folks who have done this. There are folks who have walked this walk. And what's interesting is sometimes when someone has done something before us, we can learn from their experience. We can kind of glean some insight from them and think, oh, I would not have thought of that, or maybe I didn't realize it would be quite that way. And we actually have a perfect example.
Yeah, we have a friend of the show, and I love that because Jason's going to be completely shocked that we're going to use him as the example on this. We have a friend of the show that actually retired in their 40s, and I think it's interesting. Jason is retired, and he is doing what I've seen happen so others, because we've also on a previous show we had Fritz from the Retirement Manifesto on. And anybody who retires early, it is amazing to me the people who go through this journey, they have these brilliant minds. And I think once they start going through it, they like the idea of sharing what they've learned because, so you typically see content creation. You see blogs, you see, podcasts. Well, Jason's kind of gone on that journey too, where he has created a blog, and I think he's dabbling also on YouTube, where he's got the next phase is now. And I thought this was very interesting. He just recently did a blog post that was 1 year after he officially retired early, and some of the unique and surprising things that he realized in reflection after that year. And I just highlighted a few of these things because he wrote, the things you miss about the workplace may surprise you.
Yeah, you may not realize how that thing you wanted to get away from, you're like, oh man, I kind of like that. I've been doing that for the last 20-something years. I kind of got used to that part of my life.
And he talks about, on a related point, talking about work, because one of the biggest things is workplace friendships. And he says, some of those do fall off. Unfortunately, you don't think they will, but they do because you're just not there in constant contact. But he goes on a related point. It's easy to underappreciate how much of your socialization does occur at work.
Sure.
So he just is telling you to be deliberate. You need to know, connect civically, connect somewhere in your community so you know what you're doing. Because the other part, and I thought this was a good contrarian standpoint. When you retire in your 40s, a lot of your peers that you hang out with on the weekends, they're probably working or traveling during the weekdays. So it's not like you can, unless you're watching, HBO Entourage and you are so wealthy that you can hire all your friends. I don't know what they do for you, basically, other than hang out with you. But that is something I think in normal life, the majority of your peer group might be working. Now, Bo, you hang out with everybody that's 20 to 30 years older.
Yeah.
So you probably would be
work okay for me.
But it is something that I think most people have to take into consideration. And then the last thing Jason talks about when you go check this blog post out is that there's no right way to do this. Or I think what he's trying to give you is the grace to understand. Nobody does this perfectly.
That's right.
You can plan, there's going to be variables. You're not going to get everything right, but you can at least go on the journey. Just make sure, I've said it multiple times on this show, and I know it makes a few of you cringe, but I think it's that important. Measure twice, cut once. You better do the planning on the front end so that you don't get yourself in a bad situation.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about some numbers, right? Let's do some checks for our 40s. Remember, here's the construct that we're going to operate under. If we're going to retire in our 40s, we need a lower safe withdrawal rate than the traditional 4% would suggest. If we want to retire at age 40, we think that we should have a withdrawal rate somewhere around 2 3/4. If we want to retire at 45, our withdrawal rate should be around 3%. And what we said is, based on our earning years, if we know that every year we're going to get about a 1.5% increase in pay, when we retire, when we enter into financial independence, we want to have a pot of money big enough to replace 60% of our pre-retirement income. Right. That's the construct that we've laid out. So here's sort of the spot check if you're in your 40s. If you're age 40 and you want to retire at age 40, you should have about 29.4 times your gross income saved up. So almost 30 times your gross income in order to retire. If you want to retire at 45 and you're age 40, you need about 16.5 times your gross income. If you want to retire at 50, by age 40, you should have almost 10 times your gross income saved up. And then if you're planning on retiring at 55 and you're age 40 right now, you want a little under 6 times your gross income currently saved. For those that are 45, again, if you want to retire at 45, you need to have 29 times your gross income saved up. If you want to retire at 50, you need about 17 times your gross income saved up. And if you want to retire at 55, by age 45, you should have accumulated about 10 times your gross income to be on track for that kind of retirement. Again, we cannot say this enough. This is napkin math. What this is this is giving you an idea of if you're on the right track or not. Of course, before you retire, you want to have a very detailed, very granular, very segmented plan that you have stress tested to make sure that your specific plan will work, but you can use these numbers as a spot check to make sure that you're in the right lane.
I'm glad you brought that up, because even though it's only a 1% of the population is retiring in their 40s, 20s and 30s, it's kind of stuff you daydream about. But for people in their 40s and 50s, you really might be considering it at this point. Yep. You might be one of the successful 1% that's done this. I would just say don't underestimate the value of creating a great plan, because remember, like when I tell anybody do anything major, like start a business, I always say run 3 scenarios. Run what you think is going to happen, run, oh my gosh, this is going to work out better than I thought, and then please run, do not exclude this one, oh man, this is going much worse than anticipated. Because if you'll run those multiple scenarios, this is why I like people taking the relationship to the next level. Just like you take 10,000 hours or 5 years to build expertise in your career that starts paying you money, you're going to need that same 10,000 hours to transition well from working in the workforce to working yourself into full financial independence. And that's going to probably include somebody helping you run the numbers, think about the contingencies. It's very important that you don't underestimate this just because you check the box on doing the napkin financial plan through some of these benchmarks.